Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aquarian Mind podcast. Today's podcast, episode number 42. I'm your host, Jamel Crothers. It's Book Insight Friday, and today we're delving into a new series. It's The World We Live In, poetry book on social issues, part 1. This is a poetry prose book that is tackling a lot of social issues that are going on in the world today. And honestly, writing the first book of the series, it was really supposed to be a standalone book, but, it kind of explains why the endings for each character happened the way it did when you read part 1. But the idea came of writing 3 books, and then I finally decided I'm just going to write a 5-book series. And when I decided to write the 5-book series, I was in the middle of writing 5-book series for Code Blue and The Struggles and Growth of a Man. So I was kind of juggling in between three different book series at the same time. So I mean, imagine trying to write three different book series at one time. But it was a lot to write and accomplish, and it was definitely going to be a tough feat. Now, developing the characters, there wasn't an intention to write 19 different characters, but I just pretty much thought of common names and, wrote them down. And then next came, well, what would their life story be? So I spent time thinking of all the major social issues that we deal with in today's society. So it would be drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sex and porn, gambling, domestic violence, gender, homelessness, depression, sexual abuse and rape, women's issues, men's issues, self-esteem, idolizing celebrities, child abuse, and pretty much that was just a lot to cover. And in my mind, once again, I'm thinking to myself, Mello, you're crazy. Now, as you know from previous podcasts, when I tell myself I'm crazy, I know that I have to do it. I know I have to go full-fledged. I know I have to take on this challenge, write the series, see how far I can take it, see how much I can develop these characters, things of that nature. So how am I writing these characters to where you will feel and go for this ride into their lives and what they're dealing with and struggling with? Now, the beginning of the book is basically a punch in the chest. It's about a young woman named Christina who goes to a party and drinks a little bit too much of something that was spiked, and some unfortunate events happen that change the landscape of her life pretty much for the short term and the long term. And I don't want to give it away, but let's just say it's a social issue that goes on in today's world. And it goes on entirely too much, and I know that I had to bring it to the forefront. But it was definitely worth writing it. It was just hard to write her story. So brainstorming sessions, I remember I took up most of the day doing that because I had to line up everything with these characters. So when I started to write it, if you look at the characters and how I wrote them, it's female, the next is the male all the way throughout the book. I had to variate it, I had to change it up. I didn't want to do a whole bunch of chapters of women and later on do a whole bunch of chapters of men. I needed to, do that because I needed to break the monotony of reading chapters of a bunch of men in a row or a bunch of women in a row. So I just wanted to write this first book and bring out a lot of emotional moments, and really make you feel and understand these characters. I'm not going to sit here and lie. This was the toughest series I had to write. I had to stop and breathe for a few minutes because when you write about social issues of this magnitude, you have to immerse yourself into these characters and tell hard-hitting stories that will pretty much shake you to the core of your existence. Like, it's really deep stuff that I write about, and that was my intention and goal with writing this series. If I was, stopping and taking breaks, it was telling me that I had something brewing and it was going to impact people in various ways. And as you, continue to read about these characters, you learn who they are, and then as you continue the series, you start to understand their backstories and their lives. But that's for the rest of the series of Book Insight Friday. I would say this book was the most challenging to write because you got to think there's 19 different characters, so you're telling 19 different stories and developing their personalities and, like I said, backstories, current stories, life situations, thoughts of their own. So I'm stepping out of my own shoes and stepping into their shoes to tell a story that will make you realize that we are all going through our own internal battles and we really have to be understanding of each other. And finishing the book, well, when I did, I felt accomplished. And when I finished the series, that was a huge accomplishment. But editing was, I would say, the hardest part because I had to rearrange some wording. I had to emote certain sentences and things of that nature to bring the story out better. But I would say that I'm so thankful to have been able to write that book alone, like just part one to this book. It was enjoyable in a lot of ways to bring these stories to light. But then it's also sad, because this is, our reality every day of all of these social issues that are going on. And, I wrote about, a young child who is abused, and he's a young child and, he has a mother who's an alcoholic. So her character's in the book also, and she deals with alcohol addiction, and there's a backstory to that. I write about a character who's homeless and the tough battles of being a homeless person living on the street. And, I try to bring that story to light. And I take homelessness very seriously because I always feel like I could be one bad financial decision from being homeless. So, and that happens in life. And this character lost his wife and his life changed and he didn't appreciate his wife. So just a little tidbit on that character. And then, I'm tackling a character who has a drug addiction and another character who has a gambling addiction. So there are just a lot of different aspects that I bring to light. I talk about domestic violence, and that was a really hard story to, write about as the series went on. And I had to really bring some shock value to not only this book, but also the following books throughout the series. And while I would love to sit here and read a chapter, a lot of these chapters are very long, so I don't want to sit here and spend 8 minutes, reading a story. I feel like if you were to go onto Amazon or any of the other major bookstores and, you kind of open the book and get to read, like the first chapter or so, you'll really get to understand, how I wrote it and why I wrote it the way I did. It's a poetry prose format, so it's different than the traditional book that you would read. So I hope you guys will take the time to really check that out. It's really, really tough, hard-hitting stuff. So, just sit and read that book in one shot. I don't recommend it. I highly doubt that anyone really read that book in one shot. Let alone read that whole 5-book series in such a fast amount of time. This is the longest series that I've written as far as page count. And that's because of it being 19 characters and, there's so much to talk about and so much to bring out. So I know you guys are thinking, well, how do you write a 5-book series about someone who's, dealing with an alcohol addiction or things of that nature? Well, it's developing characters and storylines, and you always have to, make sure that you develop a backstory to these characters, and that's what I'm able to bring to light. And as I continue to talk about this Book Insight, in the coming weeks, I'll share other aspects and why I wrote those books in those series a certain way. And I think that part 3 is the longest book in the series, and it's the longest book page-wise that I've written to date, and that probably will be the longest book I'll ever write. I think that was 183 pages. That's a lot of pages for me, in a nutshell. But I will say that there will be a lot of emotions and tearjerkers as you read part 1 alone. And then as the series goes on and develops, you know, you guys will start to experience a little bit of some hope for a lot of these characters, and that's the goal behind that. So with that said, that's my Book Insight Friday for today. This book, The World We Live In, is on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Apple iTunes, and all other major bookstores. Paperbacks will be on Amazon. I'm working on branching that out and getting paperbacks into other outlets. You can also find the paperbacks on booksamillion.com also. So with that said, that's my insight with the Book Insight Friday. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Be good, everyone, and go accomplish your goals.